The Honourable Matthew Swinburne.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise now to make my contribution on the second reading debate and as to the question as to whether the bill should be read a second time. From the outset, I'd like to indicate my support for the bill, and what I'll do in my speech is give an idea as to why I have come to that opinion. So the nature of my speech today will be to put on the public record my reasons for supporting the bill, and I feel like there's a duty for all of us who can do that to do that. My contribution is not meant to persuade or dissuade anybody from their position. I've come to my view based on my particular reasons. Echoing the final comments of the Honourable Colin Holt, I'd like to make some acknowledgements to begin with. And the first acknowledgement, of course, is to the Select Committee into End-of-Life Choices. That includes all of its members, the committee staff, of course, who work very hard on all of our committees, and it'll be fair to say they often do but most of the serious legwork, and the committee members are well served by them. I'd also like to acknowledge those people that have taken the time to write to me, both through emails and the old-fashioned way as well. I think it's the most correspondence I've received through the post box for a long time, and people have written to me earnestly expressing their views. Of course, I've faced the same sort of arguments for and against, the most common one being this is my view and I'm your constituent and you should do what I tell you to do. That is plainly impossible. I cannot keep all 400,000+ constituents of the East Metropolitan region happy, as much as we might try. And so, yes, we've had an exceptionally large number of correspondence. I think we're well over 1,000 now. And so I would also like to thank my staff who have had the laborious task of having to deal with all that correspondence, to read the stories that come through and to experience it, and there's been an impact on them as much as there has me as to those stories and those points of view. So I do especially want to note my staff. The members of the Ministerial Expert Panel as well, who have dedicated themselves to this task that has been given to them by the government with great care and application. I can't imagine it's been easy for them within the process itself, and for some of the doctors on that and medical people on that panel within their own professions. And so I'd like to acknowledge them as well. In terms of the issue itself, I have sought, like I think all members here, to engage with the community as much as I can. So I did meet with constituents. I've met constituents in my office, but we've also all met constituents in and around our electorates. You go to a fair or you go to an event and your constituents feel compelled to come up to you and express their view, to ask you how you're voting, and at times to ask you to explain why you're voting the way that I intended to vote. And I think in all instances that has been done respectfully, even where they have a different point of view. And so there was that. I've met with proponents who are against the voluntary assisted dying. Again, those people have conducted themselves in a respectful manner and come and spoken to me, and I've shared my views with them, and they've taken those on board. In terms of engagement, Dr Tony Beattie, the member for Armidale, and I also hosted a debate in the Kelmscott Hall, and that was an instructive debate. We had over 100 people attend, I think, and the debate was between Dr Michael Gannon, the former AMA President, and Dr Scott Blackwell, the former AMA President and also a member of the Ministerial Expert Panel. And so I'd like to thank both Dr Gannon and Dr Blackwell, and also my friend Dr Tony Beattie, for putting that on and again giving an opportunity for this issue to be ventilated in the community. The debate itself was not a debate so much about presenting an argument in favour of it. It was genuinely a debate between two proponents who had different views. I also had the opportunity to visit the palliative care unit at Kalamunda Hospital with the Honourable Nick Guerin, and I thank the Honourable Nick Guerin for organising that and considering me in bringing me along with him to that visit up at the Kalamunda Hospital, and I thank the staff there for facilitating it, particularly Dr Andy Hart. So we got an appreciation of what was actually happening in the field in terms of palliative care within my electorate, and they're doing good work up there at the Kalamunda Hospital. It's a nice place, it has further capacity, they have grand plans for that, and I look forward to seeing those increases in palliative care funding work their way through the system and enjoy that. It's a nice spot there actually if you don't have had a chance to go up to Kalamunda Hospital. It sits alongside the forest there, so I think if I would like to think of a place I'd like to spend my last few days, I think that's the kind of place that would be appealing to me. We're not all sand and surf people, some of us are hills and trees, so you know, we want a bit of a variety in that as well, so yeah. So, of course, I've also attended the numerous briefings that have been made available to all of us, and I thank those people who have taken the time to brief us. The most instructive of those have been the ones where people have come in not to advance a particular point of view, but to give information. And I think from the point of view of the task that we have, I have found that most helpful and instructive. In terms of the correspondence, it's not possible to have read every single piece, and I'm not going to pretend that I have. I tried to read as much as I could, but the stories that were presented in there were certainly very compelling. And both some people eloquently put their arguments for and against. So I'd like to talk about what does and does not inform my position in relation to voluntary assisted dying and the general issue of euthanasia. So, of course, I'm instructed by my values, and one of those values is the idea of personal autonomy and the right for people's autonomy to be respected. And I think having gone through a number of highly complex medical scenarios, the idea that the patient comes first is one that is particularly important to me, because when people start making decisions for us, the outcomes tend to not be as good as they should be. So for me, personal autonomy in any environment is a particularly important one, and that also extends to children. Children should also very much be at the centre of any medical model. Having spent many nights at Princess Margaret Hospital speaking to nurses that have been in the system for a very long time, they would often describe about the good old days, in one sense, where parents were only permitted to visit their children at the hospital, I think, on a Wednesday and a Sunday afternoon. And so there was no sense that the family and the parents were involved with the needs of the child that was in the hospital and that's sick. And I don't think any of us now could contemplate the thought that we would have such restricted access to our own children in a medical environment. And so for the Children's Hospital, the focus is on family-centred care, but also at the heart of that is still the patient, as opposed to those ideas that may have existed, those paternalistic ideas that doctor knows best, that matron knows best, and that was what was imposed on the patients, and you didn't get a great deal of say in what your treatment course was. You weren't informed of what your options were. You weren't informed necessarily of what the treatment path was going to be. It'd be fair to say that the medical profession as a whole, doctors, nurses and allied health professionals, have moved a long way past that, and I think overwhelmingly there's a recognition that patients come first and their wishes are what comes first. And for me, in the voluntary assisted dying debate, that doesn't change. The person who has the terminal illness or the neurodegenerative disease still comes first, and their wishes comes first, and there's nothing that I can see that should overcome that in these circumstances. It is, as the Honourable Aaron Stonehouse said, a matter of liberty, and his speech I listened to very carefully, and I appreciated the contribution that he made. And there's been a couple of members here who've made contributions that I particularly appreciated, including the Honourable Yorn Sidmer, who's out on urgent parliamentary business. The speech that he made was very helpful for me in the way that he characterised it. Unfortunately, Honourable Jim Chown, I missed the substance of your speech, but parts of it certainly that I'm aware of was certainly something that had some influence on me as well. I am not a religious person. I have never been a religious person, and so religion does not inform my position, and I want to be very clear about that because I think it's important that people understand that that is not one of the biases that I bring into this debate. I have my own biases, of course, but not a religious person. So, having said that, I accept that some people come here with those particular points of view, and I respect their entitlement to be informed by their religious views. That's their entitlement. I would be hardly one to respect personal autonomy if I was then to impose on others that they couldn't hold their own particular beliefs about certain things. I also hold very dear that people with capacity are entitled to make their own decisions. It's particularly the case for young people, the frail, the elderly, those with disabilities. And having been involved in the inquiry into elder abuse, what was often put front and centre of us is to never lose sight of the fact that the elderly have agency. They have the right to make their own decisions, good or bad, and that is an entitlement that we can't take away. It comes back to that sense of paternalism that sometimes permeates in our culture about I know best for you because you don't have all your faculties. Well, if you've got your faculties, regardless of your other attributes, you should be able to make decisions for yourself, and that includes people with disabilities as well. So as I said, I essentially detest paternalism. I think the I know what is best for you mentality. I think that is not to be confused with an idea that those that are experts in their field, those that are trying to help others prevent harm to themselves through education programs or through the extension of safety measures into our society are not necessarily being paternalistic in those approaches, and I wouldn't like people to think that I was casting any kind of dispersions on their attempts to improve either our health or our well-being in society. I have always generally supported the concept of euthanasia and that it being voluntary. I'm not really sure where that came from. Being a middle child, maybe it was I hated being told what to do by everybody else, so I'm not sure if that was the starting point or the finishing point, but perhaps that's where my sense of independence has come from. And the idea that somebody could tell me that I couldn't take a course of action that I thought was appropriate for me really just rankles. So that is one of the basis and the values that informs me. But I come to the two core reasons why I support the bill. And the first of those is my brother Kerry. Kerry Evans was born 5 years after me, and we were both Aries. Not going to necessarily believe in the astrological star signs, but we used to butt heads a lot, so that's probably where that analogy comes from, being 5 years younger. Kerry was a very active, healthy, athletic person. He had a very wicked sense of humour, and he got under my skin many times. And I speak about Kerry in the past tense because he died 3 years ago of cancer. And he was only 36 when he passed away. And his cancer started off, his cancer journey started off in about 2008 when my youngest son Darcy was born. He'd had some strange symptoms for a long time. He had become quite hyperactive, was awake in the middle of the night doing odd things like gardening, or had indigestion. He had a number of different kinds of symptoms, and he kept seeing his GP to see what was going on, and the GP kept diagnosing things like anxiety or indigestion, those sorts of things. And his regular GP went on holidays, and he went and saw another GP in the same clinic, and that GP went through his symptoms and immediately sent him to Fremantle Hospital for scans, and they then discovered a very large tumorous mass growing on one of his kidneys. And it was, the size of a cricket ball. It wasn't small, and there were other tumours in his body as well. And these tumours are a special kind of tumours. They're called paraganglioma tumours, and they emit what is in effect a kind of adrenaline around the body, which causes the blood pressure to go up, the heart to race, and hence his activities. And the adrenal levels in the body are just astronomical. And they're so powerful, these tumours, in terms of the neuroendocrine effect, that they can actually, if someone's in surgery and they have a push of these hormones, it can actually take them out of anaesthetic. So he was in hospital for a couple of days. They were preparing him. They had to lower his blood pressure. They had to try and get control of these hormones in his body. And once they did that, they then did surgery and they removed his kidney and they took out some additional tumours, I think were in his lungs. So this is 2009 by this stage. And Kerry, as I say, was a very athletic, healthy person. I was always the overweight one and he was always the one giving me a hard time about it. So it was very strange to see this younger brother in the ICU at Fremantle Hospital. I don't think the image of that will ever leave me. You know, to see him so helpless and, you know, in a different state. Now, Kerry's tumour, unfortunately, and there's not a lot known about these kinds of tumours, they're genetically based. They don't come from any outside causes. So there's a mutation in a particular gene, the SDHB gene, which causes people who have that mutation to have the propensity to grow these tumours. And so Kerry's tumour had got to the point where it had actually metastasised, and so he underwent a series of radiation and chemotherapy procedures over the next several years. And there was times when we thought he was going to be cured, he would go into remission, but I don't think I'll ever forget again the day that I got the call when I was working at the CFMEU, when he called me to tell me that the tumours had gone into his bones. And that's a bad thing. Once they go into your bones, that's painful, it's difficult, and from that point forward, it was in his spine as well. It wasn't in anywhere that they could do surgery on, and so if you've got tumours in your spine, you know, you've not got many options available. Kerry loved life. He loved living. There's no question about it. His partner, Nicola, they married when he was in a stage of a sort of remission, and she was the love of his life, and she brought such joy to him as well. You know, he had a happy life. He lived happily. But the disease progressed. He got more and more frail and weak. He was staying with us for a little bit of time. He was using a wheelchair and a walker at that stage, and again, I remember he was in the shower for a long period of time, and I was like, why is he in there for so long? And I went in there and he collapsed onto the floor because he couldn't hold himself up. He didn't have the energy to yell out. And I had to pick him up off the floor. You know, my adult older brother, you know, naked in that situation, completely vulnerable, and help him in that situation. And, you know, he didn't need that to happen. But, you know, Kerry just kept going on and on. His disease progressed. He ended up in a wheelchair. He couldn't walk. And then finally he ended up back in Fiona Stanley Hospital in his last days. And he kept up his sense of humour the whole time. But I remember the last few days, and, you know, others here have been through that bedside vigil type thing. You don't know. I don't know if I ever believed that he was going to die. I probably didn't. I always thought he might get a little bit better, that he would come back, but it just kept proceeding. And we were there when he passed away. They were sedating him with the morphine. You know, he would grumble and groan and carry on, and then the nurse would be called and come in and give him another dose, and that would go. And so I guess I never wanted to talk about death with Kerry, so we never sat down and talked about it, you know, and I don't know what his views about voluntary assisted dying are, but what I would like to think is that if he had decided about the time that he wanted to go, that I would have been in a position to respect that and to go through that process with him as a young man that he was. He went quietly in a way. I don't know how quietly it was. I don't know what was going through his mind as he was being sedated with those opioids. We don't know what goes through a dying person's brain when they're sedated like that. We presume that it's some sort of happy dream, but we just don't know how they go. I mean, he hallucinated during those periods as well. So I don't know. And again, we look at that situation and we say, how would I be there? And I'm not sure I would have liked to have been in the way that he is. So I spoke about Kerry with his wife Nicola and about the circumstances. She said that they did speak about voluntary dying, not perhaps in the context of this bill. It was 2016, so it's not like this was on the cards in that particular way. But I wouldn't have thought that at any point in Kerry's life that he just gave up on living, but I would have liked to have had the choice to make terms with how he went out. He was fortunate in the sense that his family was around him for his death. We were there, the children were there. They got to say goodbye in their way, but it obviously leaves an impact. So Kerry, as I say, is one of the reasons. The underlying genetic condition that cost Kerry's life is a family condition. We didn't know that the family had a genetic mutation of this kind. And following Kerry's diagnosis, he encouraged the rest of us to get tested by the genetic services of WA. We kind of didn't really take it seriously enough. In 2010, sorry, not 2010, in 2015, my middle son Mitchell developed the same tumour, and he was 10 at that time. And he's one of the youngest people known to have developed a paraganglioma tumour, and he started having symptoms around about Christmas before that. We had some strange things. He had an enlarged nipple and we didn't know why that was. We took him to the GP and he said, oh, it might be early puberty. You know, we went on with that, and then we went to Singapore overseas for our first family trip, and then when we got back immediately he got very unwell. He was vomiting, he wasn't holding food down, he became weakened. We kept going back to the doctors. Glenda, my wife, kept taking him back to emergency department to try and get a diagnosis. And she knew in the background that there was this family condition, and she kept saying to the doctors, you know, look for this, look for this. And they didn't look for it, and when they did look for it, they didn't tell us about it, and so we ended up getting in a situation where she had to finally go to the emergency department, and she wasn't going to leave until they gave her an answer. And they looked at the blood work that had been done, and they saw that there was these elevated hormones in his blood, and it was a hard day, of course, to find that out. They then did the scans, and what they actually found was a second tumour. There was one tumour that was attached to his vena cava, which is the descending blood vessel from your heart, and then there was another one that was attached, that was in his stomach. They didn't know whereabouts, they couldn't tell. Our scanning technology is very good, but it's not perfect. And so in that circumstance, they were throwing up a range of different possibilities, and so this second tumour was a bit of a mystery. So he went into hospital, he started having the drugs to bring down his blood pressure and to make sure that he didn't come out of the anaesthetic when they had him cut open. He was there, and they then did the surgery, and there's some very, very long hours there for us waiting. The doctors came out, and only a way I suppose that doctors and surgeons can come, they were quite excited. They'd got the first tumour and then they got the second one, and it was this GIST tumour, gastrointestinal stromal tumour. And those tumours are exceptionally rare in children. And when I say rare, they'd never had a recorded case that they know of in Western Australia. I'm not sure there's ever been one found in the rest of Australia. I hope that there's never another one that's there. So they had to take part of his stomach away. They got what they thought were safe margins of that tumour, the tumours, those kind of tumours they've now discovered don't respond to radiation or chemotherapy. So he doesn't get those kind of treatments. They can just do surgery. And so Mitchell's tumour was removed, and we then, went through a very long period for him to recover. They, to get to what they need to get to, they've got to literally cut his little body open and go right in. And so we had that sort of stress, and he's been up and down with different surgeries. A couple of years later, we got the news that the tumour had metastasised and gone into his liver. And so that's where the tumours are now. There's several tumours there. His treatment options are all experimental. There is no known cure for his cancer. We've had the discussions with the oncologist about the choices that we make, the impacts of the drugs that he's on, and where he might end up with that sort of stuff. He's now participating in a drug trial out of Queensland at the Children's Hospital there, and with a drug company. And we're very fortunate that we've got that opportunity. And that drug seems to have stopped the growth of new tumours and slowed down the growth of the existing ones, so we're fortunate there. But what we did discover is that the tumours have now moved into his lungs as well. So what happens in this situation, which I don't want anybody to have to ever go through, is that the disease just keeps progressing. It just keeps moving forward, and you think that you're fighting it and that you're winning it, but you're not. You're just doing what you can. And Mitchell, you know, he's the bravest and most stoic child that I've ever met. I've not met every child in the world. I'm sure that there might be another one that is. But you just don't understand how brave that little boy is, how he never complains. He's never once said, woe is me. He's never once said, why can't it be somebody else? He just battles on and continues on. But that did change earlier this year. He was taking a drug that really knocked him out and around. He couldn't walk anymore. He had sores on his hands and his feet, and he lost his body condition. He was moving in a wheelchair. He was crawling around the house because he couldn't walk. He couldn't eat, and he was talking about having had enough, and we had to take him off the drug. It was the drug that was doing that to him. It was the cure, the supposed cure. It wasn't the disease. It took him off the drug and he improved. And the new drug, fortunately, he's doing very well. He doesn't have the side effects of the other drugs. And we're hoping that, you know, we get to the point where we can start to consider taking surgery to remove the existing tumours to buy him more time, to hopefully get to the stage where the medical fraternity, the scientific community gets to a point where they understand his kind of disease, to the point where they can treat it and there could be a cure. We hope we get to that point. We desperately, desperately hope that we do. You know, he'll be 15 in January, and he won't be eligible for these laws at 15. He won't be eligible at 16 or 17, but he'll be eligible at 18. And his journey in life is not one that suddenly had a terminal illness and, you know, flippantly decides that he's had enough. If he gets to the point where he's an adult and he can make a decision, his journey will have had so much suffering, so much pain, so much perseverance, so much of so many other things that I can't, as his father, in all honesty, deny him the right to choose to go on his own terms when he's ready to go, if he gets there. And I really hope he never gets there. But how could I, as his parent, deny him that? To be here today to vote against this bill, and he lies on his bed and he says to me, Dad, I cannot go on. I have had my time and I'm ready to go. And I say to him, son, I'm sorry, I had the chance, but I let it go. And you'll just have to wait it out. And you'll just have to go when nature takes its course. I can't do that. I just can't. I'm sorry. Other people might be able to, and I'm not suggesting that they're lesser people because of that. But for me, this is the only reason, not the only reason, but this is the compelling reason. The reason when I see him every morning, there's not a moment you look at him and you don't think about how truly sick he really is and how you enjoy every cuddle he gives. Mitchell gives the best cuddles. If you ever get a chance, you know, he's not like his older brother Harrison, who wouldn't touch me with a barge pole. Mitchell has never lost the sense of wanting to be in physical contact with his parents, and so he gives the best cuddles. He doesn't say much, he doesn't talk much, he's not that, but when he does have something to say, he lets it out. And, you know, apparently yesterday he saved a raven in his classroom, so, you know, that was a good story to hear about that sort of thing. But as I say, I can't deny him. I might be a coward because of that, but that's just what, as a parent, you just don't want to put yourself in the position where you deny your child the opportunity to be released from pain. And I speak, I think, for many parents who have children with cancer. There's not a day that you don't fight for their life, that you want them to live, that they want to live. But it takes them all. The kids go every year And I'm not encouraging us to make these laws available to children. That's not what I'm talking about. But some of them make it into adulthood and they've had their journey. And it's time, in my view, to let them make a decision. The one thing that they have very little control over, to give them some control back again. So with those words, I commend the bill to the House.
The question is the bill be read a second time.